Hey Jordan, I wanted to let you know we're live on YouTube and ready in eScribe.
Great, thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and call the Land Use and Planning Committee for June 23rd to order. This remains a virtual meeting, and you all know the drill by now. We do have an attendee in the audience, so if you're participating in this meeting via Zoom, when we get to the public comment portion of the agenda, I just ask that you use the raise hand feature within Zoom if you'd like to provide public comment. If anyone is watching on the city website, you can find the agenda to join the live Zoom meeting at ci.missoula.mt.us/webcasts. On that webpage, there will be a link to the agenda, and within the agenda, a link to join the live Zoom meeting. So again, when we get to that point for public comment, just use the raise hand feature within Zoom, or if you're joining us by phone, you can press *9 to indicate to me that you want to give a public comment. Our first item of business, as always, is roll call. Amanda, can you call the roll for us, please?
Yes. Anderson?
She's absent this afternoon.
Absent. Becerra? Absent. Contos?
Here.
Harp? Absent. Hess?
Present.
Jones? Absent. Merritt? Absent. Ramos?
So you're muted.
I'll mark him as present. I see he's here. Cheryl?
Present.
Vasika?
Present.
Von Lossberg?
Here.
And West? Absent.
Okay, thanks. So we have 6 members present. So we do not have a quorum.
Present now, so I apologize.
Oh, thanks, Jesse. So we have 6 members present. So we are short of a quorum. We do not have an action item today. I know that several of our committee members are at an event at the university and will be unable to join us today. And so we'll just trust that they'll get caught up to speed from the meeting record today. We have meeting minutes from. Oh, and Heidi West is joining us, so we will have a quorum. So we can approve the minutes then. So we have minutes from June 9th. Are there any changes to those minutes? Seeing none, those will be approved. We have one item of committee business, and this is a subdivision exemption for family transfer. This is Tract 1 of Certificate of Survey 6397, located at the corner of Polk and Poplar in the Rattlesnake Valley. We had the public hearing open on Monday, and so as usual, this is our post-public hearing discussion and informational item, so there's no action today. And then this will be back for final consideration at council on next Monday, June 28th. So we have Emily Gluckin here from the department formerly known as Development Services, which I just blanked on. Community Development, community plan. I apologize. Community planning, development, and innovation, I believe. There we go. All right. So Emily, I'll turn it over to you for any updates and maybe a brief recap on the project and any new information that's emerged since the public hearing opened.
Sounds good. I will go through a brief recap. Let me just share my screen. Here we go. All right, so as Jordan mentioned, I'm Emily Glockin. I'm an associate planner in the Development Services Division of CPDI. And this project is a subdivision exemption for a family transfer of Tract 1 of Certificate of Survey 6397. Just a reminder, the property is located on Polk Street, kind of where Polk Street and Poplar Street intersect at the base of Mount Jumbo. So this subdivision exemption request includes the transfer of 2 tracts of land to the applicant's son and daughter, respectively. And Montana state law authorizes this type of division of land for the purpose of a single gift of sale to each member of the landowner's immediate family. So that's in state law, and then our city subdivision regulations require the review and hearing before city council if the requested family transfer is for a use different from the land use designation as designated in the growth policy, but a use that complies with the goals and objectives or policies of the growth policy. So this code in city subdivision is why we're here today. The growth policy designation as provided in the our Missoula 2035 city growth policy is parks and open lands. And areas with this parks and open lands designation are typically open in nature and intended for use as a public park, a common area for a group of residents, or for conservation purposes. And the relatable Title 20 zoning district for the parks and open lands land use designation is OP1, open space. Following the family transfer, the applicant proposes to use the tracts for residential purposes, which conflicts with this land use designation. However, staff found that the proposal for residential uses does comply with the housing goals of the growth policy, which includes providing for diverse housing needs through compatible residential development. And it also supports the growth policy's recommendation for that includes clustering development on resource land or land with natural hazards, which in this case on this property is steep hillsides, to minimize impacts to these sensitive areas. The zoning is has a base zone of R5.4 residential, and it is within the Woody planned unit development. And it's surrounded by open space districts and unzoned lands. The R5.4 zone, which is the base zoning district, allows single detached homes or lot line houses, and the minimum parcel area required is 5,400 square feet. And the minimum parcel area required per dwelling unit is also 5,400 square feet. And then in addition to the standards of the R5.4 district, the Woody PUD requires that no building footprints for both primary or accessory structures can be built above the 3,260 foot elevation line. So here is how the tract exists today. It is currently just under an acre at 40,652 square feet. And it is vacant land with steep slopes to the east of the property. And it has frontage on Polk Street and abuts a 16-foot wide alley that comes off of Polk Street. Following this family transfer, Tract 1 is proposed to be split into 3 tracts, 2 of which will be gifted to the applicant's son and daughter. So that's Tract 1 and Tract 2. Both proposed Tract 1 and Tract 2 will be 5,857 square feet. Tract 1 will have frontage on Polk Street, and it abuts the Poplar Street right of way. And Tract 2 has frontage on Polk Street an alley and abuts the alley. Tract 3 will be 28,939 square feet and abuts the Poplar Street right of way and will be accessed from the alley. And each, as I mentioned before, each of these tracts is proposed for residential development, and any new development that happens will be required to meet all applicable city regulations at the time of building permit review. And I'll just go through these conditions of approval quickly. I touched on them on Monday, but staff recommends 7 conditions of approval. The first is in relation to that no build zone requirement from the Woody PUD that no buildings can be above that 3,260 foot line. So we recommend that they mark that on their amended certificate of survey. The second condition is in relation to right-of-way improvements on Polk Street. The third and the fourth condition are relate to filing easements for both utility and access. And then the final 3 are relate to comments that we received from fire, which I'll touch on in a little bit, but so they include installation of a fire hydrant and then 2 conditions relating to the installation of residential fire sprinklers. So I just mentioned that we received agency comment both from City Fire and City Parks. City Fire's comments were relating to the proximity and the volume of a fire hydrant, and they recommended that residential fire sprinklers be required. And then Parks's comment relates to the proximity to the trailhead, and some questions were raised at the public hearing on Monday, and representatives from both agencies are here today to help answer those questions. So we can jump into those after this recap. Regarding Fire's comment, the question that was brought up on Monday was primarily why the water volume for the hydrant is insufficient at the property. And in relation to Parks, a concern was raised on Monday that residential development on the property and any associated driveways that would be installed would eliminate on-street parking that is used by trailhead users. And yeah, our staff's recommended motion is approval. So that is my recap. I don't have too many updates to offer other than Parks and Fire are here to follow up on those questions and facilitate that conversation.
Okay, thanks. And I'll highlight that we received a comment by email that I shared. Mr. Van Lossberg, Ms. West, and I received a comment from Randall Williams, and I shared that with council so that you all have that for background. So let's go through some questions, and then we can dig into the fire and the trail issues. But I've got a question queue going. Sandra first, and then Brian.
Oh, I didn't have a question. I just have some comments. So I'll let Brian go first.
Brian?
Thanks. So I had some questions that kind of go back to the family transfer exemption use as a starting point before getting into the conditions. We've received some public comment, and I've tried to follow through this with the appropriate regs. And so I guess it's questions both to you, Emily, and to Mary as need be. It seems to me as I go through our subdivision regulations that sort of the first part of this process is determining the entitlement to use the exemption. And I want to, it's clear to me about the gift to children aspect, but I'd like to make sure that I and the public are understanding properly the applicable criteria for assessing that, and which seems to me to be the criteria in section Article 8, pardon me while I scroll. Well, 8-040 has the types of exemptions under sub 3. This is B, the family transfer exception. 4 describes the procedure, and the hearing relative under D for evidence around the exemption. I know there's some concern that around the use of the exemption. And then is the appropriate criteria then under, let me just ask you where to look for the appropriate criteria.
So I can bring up my slide again about this, but share.
And if it's okay, Emily, sorry, I got to. Under F, I see it reads, at the hearing on entitlement to the exemption, the council will consider all relevant circumstances in determining whether subdivision plat is required. Relevant circumstances may include, and then there is a list of 9 relevant circumstances. Is that, I read that to be the criteria that we consider relative to the appropriateness of the exemption. Is that correct? Question to you and Mary.
I'm just bringing up that criteria so
I can answer that. Yes, that would be the criteria.
And if I may, Jordan.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Okay. Is there, would it be appropriate to ask staff to respond? I don't see essentially in the application, unless I'm missing it, in the staff report where there's an analysis of those criteria. I've gone through those criteria, myself. I'd like to ask staff to assess the appropriateness relative to this criteria. Would that be appropriate?
Certainly, we could provide that in a memo that we could issue on Friday before final consideration. A lot of times we work with the city attorney's office to review for evasion of subdivision. That's essentially what these criteria are based on.
And has that happened in this case, Mary?
We didn't outline it in the staff report, but no, we did not. We did confer with the city attorney's office, and we do not see that the application has met the threshold for saying there's an evasion of subdivision.
Okay, that's helpful and kind of gets at my last question. Thanks, Jordan. I was gonna essentially ask if there was any guidance from staff or the city attorney office relative to sort of, I guess what I would describe as the threshold of review or the standard of review might be sort of more appropriate. I'm cognizant that there is a list of 9 considerations listed. The language is that relevant circumstances may include those items. So I take that to not be the definitive list. And I also note the absence, sometimes when we do annexation and rezoning, there is a more explicit standard around meeting, 1 of 3 conditions or something like that. And I don't see any sort of guidance here, but I would appreciate knowing if there is any sort of guidance around threshold review, if that makes sense, for interpreting those criteria. Did that make sense?
Yes. And we primarily, it's a difficult thing to kind of land at, in terms of whether they've met that threshold. We also are primarily reviewing whether it complies with zoning, and all the lots created in this will comply with zoning, and it is zoned, right? So we were looking at those provisions, but we rely on conversations and review with city attorney's office on that.
Okay. And I would lastly just note, any language from either you or the city attorney's office around, the last of the criteria is the transaction is not substantial. I'm certainly, there's not a lot of words there, but it's, I do read some meaning into that. I think it's worth noting, I also note that a good portion of the remaining, the third lot has a condition of no build given the elevation. So, all right, I think those are my questions for now. Thanks, Jordan, for the opportunity to go through several.
Yep, thank you. Sandra, go ahead. And you can feel free to make comments now too. It doesn't have to just be questions.
Thanks. So I guess I have a procedural question. So there's a couple of recommendations from staff that I don't agree with. So when we do make the final consideration, am I allowed to make an amendment to like move the motion disregarding a couple of the amendments, or how does that work?
So like of the recommended conditions of approval, you'd like to strike some of those?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that would be completely appropriate to make after there's, on Monday night, after there's a motion on the floor, I think you could make the amendment to remove those conditions.
Okay.
It might be, I think it would be helpful if you're willing to state those today, just so that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I guess because it's moving to a family, I don't really agree how there's so many conditions that the city is implying that they need to do. So for one, I don't really agree with the no building more than 3,200 feet. That condition number one. I don't really agree with number two, the right-of-way improvements. And then like Mayor Engen said, I know that there is not really a good flow with the fire hydrant, but if there's going to be a fire hydrant, I don't really agree with that. Condition number 6 is sprinklers required in the residence. So those are the ones that I'm thinking of striking.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
And I think that that's probably most appropriate, like I said, just to, after the motions on the floor on council during final consideration, that you could propose those amendments then.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Brian.
Thanks. I appreciate fire being here. I've read through those requirements. I had a question about those conditions as well, and hoping to understand at a deeper level. And I guess, frankly, I'm a little concerned about the aspect of a fire hydrant with insufficient flow. So I was just hoping to get some more details about that from fire.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Dax?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So typically, fire hydrants are put in by new development. But there's several areas in town. I can think of the Franklin School part of town. A lot of places up the Rattlesnake where we don't have proper hydrant coverage. And a lot of that is because at one time they belonged to the county. And when they came over to the city, you're kind of grandfathered in if you're already up there in your existing piece of land. But the way the city fills that is to, as you get development, is have that come in afterwards. You know, it's kind of the price to play the game. I'm not the hydrants. The nearest hydrant is Vine and Polk on that one. So they're missing. They're not close enough to a hydrant. When you build a single family home, you're supposed to be within 600 feet of a hydrant. And I think they come up short on that. And then it needs to be 1,000 gallons per minute at 20 PSI. And that's a rating. So generally speaking, a hydrant doesn't drop all the way down to that, but it's a calculation. But they are currently like 500 gallons a minute or something like that. Gallons a minute. So they fall short of the distance to the hydrant. They fall short of the GPM. And generally speaking, sprinklers in a single family home are a trade-off that allows you to build. So it's they fall short on the GPM. We're always willing to trying to do the best we can, but the cost, they would have to go all the way down to Rattlesnake to try and improve that, and pretty astronomical to get the fire hydrants to where they need to be because the lines are too small up there.
If I may, Jordan.
Yeah, thanks. And I think Mary wants to add as well. Mary, why don't you go first, and then Brian, if you have follow-ups.
Sure. I just wanted to, I think just to clarify, one of the questions I heard was that we were requiring, based on fire comment, to have an installation of a fire hydrant, but because it would not have adequate flows, sprinklers were also required in the homes. And is that because the water main would have to be upgraded to that hydrant to provide adequate flows? Is that the concern?
Is that a question to me or to Dax?
To Dax, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to round out what I heard to make sure that if we are having to amend conditions, staff understands the framework of the needs in the fire code.
Okay, I probably should have went to this. But where's it at? I'm gonna
appendix B or C.
I'm talking. It's in the fire code where when you end up being short on single family residences, that if you end up sprinkling, you can come up short on the fire hydrants. Okay. We actually have areas in town where they can't, the hydrants are kind of astronomical to even get them there, and usually we'll accept a sprinkler system.
Or in the appendix.
It's in C. We'll accept those. But in this one, we put both because they got the line out there. So in a way, the development is working the way it's supposed to. We're getting a new hydrant. It's a poor hydrant. It's not going to, it'll help their neighbors. And that's the way we fill in hydrants in the city. It's kind of like, I would say, the price of getting in the game. The other people are grandfathered in. They're not going to provide the hydrants for themselves. It's a place where we can fill in places in the city, but because it's a poor hydrant, will allow a sprinkler system in their homes, and then in lieu of providing the fire flows that they're supposed to provide with new construction.
And Jordan, is it okay if I wrap up on that? Yes. Oh,
Yes, go ahead with your follow-up.
thanks, Dax and Mary. And I think it was the last part of what you described a bit earlier that I was kind of interested in, which is really getting at understanding not just with this development and this particular hydrant, but actually the sort of limitations that it sounds like are related to the infrastructure throughout, I'm guessing at least that part of the lower Rattlesnake. So that's helpful to know, and probably more of a question, frankly, for water utility folks as I go down that route. And while I have it, I'll just also queue up. I know Neil Miner is here, and there were questions around the trailhead and parking and such, and I'm certainly interested, as I think others are, in hearing any further detail or comments from Neil.
Okay, thanks. Let's come back to that in a moment. Sandra?
Thanks. So I guess I'm a little bit confused. So are you requiring sprinkler systems if it's, because I know that one of them was designated as a duplex as well as a single residence, single family home. So are you requiring sprinklers if they're only single family homes or only if it's a duplex rented out to others?
We'd be requiring sprinkler systems regardless.
Okay, thank you.
So there's a lot of history on this, but we have the city has an ISO rating for fire. And one of the things is that's when the insurance industry looks and awards us our ISO rating, they look at our hydrants, what our fire flows are around town, and sprinkler systems are a trade-off for new construction when it becomes basically undoable or financially undoable to get the fire flows that we need. So.
May I follow up on that, Jordan?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, so I am familiar with the ISO ratings, and the majority of the houses in Missoula are of a rating of 3. But isn't it up to the individual homeowner what their rating is so that they do get a discount on their homeowner's insurance, or does it have a huge impact on the city itself?
I don't think it's up to the individual homeowner what their ISO rating is.
City.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, thanks. So let's go to Neil now. Are there any other questions about fire while we're on this topic? Okay, so let's move over to Neil, and we can talk about trailhead parking. And Neil, you're probably aware of the public comment that we received on Monday night, and if you could just talk generally about the trailhead parking situation and how what the impacts might be as this development moves forward, if it does move forward.
Yeah, thank you. Neil Miner, Missoula Parks and Recreation. I'm the Parks and Trails Design Development Manager. The Poplar and Polk Trailhead for Mount Jumbo is a seasonal trailhead that closes during the winter. It's a steep little connection that goes up to the L Trail. The primary trailhead in this area is the Cherry Street Trailhead, which is just kind of north from here, a couple blocks. So this is kind of a secondary neighborhood connection. And so we for these neighborhood level amenities like neighborhood parks, we typically don't allow on or provide a parking lot. It's usually on street, and that goes for neighborhood parks. So if you think about MRL Park or Franklin Park, well, Franklin's probably not the best because it has parking in the boulevard, but some of those parking or neighborhood amenities just don't have parking lots. They have the on-street parking. And so it'd be in the right of way. So this would be, Poplar Street does not really have curb gutter sidewalk and a lot of this. So a lot of the residents around there park in the boulevard with head-in parking. And so it does add a little. I think there will be still some on-street parking, but all the times I've been at this trailhead, there's, a handful of cars maybe, but the majority go to that Cherry Street Trailhead.
Okay, thanks. Are there any additional questions on trailhead? Okay, seeing none, I think I'd like to go to public comment at this point, and then we can come back to any council discussion. Would anyone in the audience like to comment? Again, if you're joining with Zoom, you can use the hand raise feature within Zoom. And if you're joining by phone, you can press *9 on your phone. Okay, there we go. So, Mr. Williams, you should be able to unmute yourself now and introduce yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Randall Williams. I live at 1310 Vine Street, which is on the corner of Vine and Polk. So I'm in the property that's immediately adjacent to this. The alley that would be developed is sort of within our backyard. I guess I had one question regarding the fire concern, and that is, the fire hydrant, it seems if there's a requirement for sprinklers, that's the city acknowledging that this fire hydrant is insufficient to address a fire in those single family residences. That fire hydrant would be out in front of my house. And so I'm wondering if, that's the nearest hydrant to me. Is it going to have a sign on it that says, don't use this one, go to the one further away because this isn't sufficient to, is this, I guess that's one of the questions I had. I heard a comment to the effect that this would be a benefit for the neighbors, but in my case, I'm getting a fire hydrant that's less useful right out in front of my house. And I don't have sprinklers. So that's one concern I had. And then the second comment I have, just stemming from the conversation that I've heard just now, is the acknowledgement that one of these is a duplex. At least there's a discrepancy between the written affidavit and the site drawing. And so the residence closest to me is written up as a duplex that would presumably be a rental. And it was my understanding that's not compliant with zoning from what I heard earlier. And that the zoning here is for single family residences, and also that one of the, I guess, litmus tests used to determine whether or not an exemption is appropriate is that the property will be used and occupied by the recipients. So presumably they wouldn't be renting these properties. I guess those are my sort of comments from what I've heard just now. Appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, thanks for your comments, and we'll try to get answers to your questions. Would anyone else like to comment at this time? Okay. None. Oh, I'm sorry.
And
yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry if I may. There are a number of other neighbors who would have liked to comment, but they weren't aware of this hearing until this morning. One of the reasons that folks have used this exemption in the past is to prohibit participation from members of the community in these types of planning processes. So I spoke to at least 3 neighbors who live on the corner on the block this morning who were not aware of it until hours before this hearing. So they asked if there is some way to submit written comment before the hearing, but they were unable. So they just asked me to pass that along.
Okay, thanks. And I have your email from last night, so I will follow up with the ways to comment, and you're welcome to disseminate that to any neighbors as you see fit. And then I'll just say right now in the meeting, in case anyone's listening, that we can receive emails at council@ci.missoula.mt.us. We also have a council voicemail, which is 406-552-6012. And there's also a project website actually, let me confirm that. Emily, is there an Engage Missoula site for this?
Yes, there is.
Okay, so on the engagemissoula.com, there's a project website here, and they can also submit written comment on that website. So, and thanks for highlighting that. Okay, back to council discussion. Any additional council questions or discussion, Brian?
I was just wondering if staff could respond to the question in public comment around the zoning and duplex single family housing.
Okay,
I can respond to that. So on the proposed site plan, it does say that single or duplex residential is a proposed use, but in the R 5.4 district, and on a parcel that's 5,800 square feet, roughly, only a single dwelling would be permitted. So we have in the findings of fact that any new development would need to comply with zoning. So a duplex would not be permitted under that review or at the time of building permit. So that is misleading, but
Okay.
yeah, it would on both tract one, actually on all tracks, only a single detached home would be allowed. So in no case would a duplex be permitted.
Okay, thanks. Mary?
Sorry. I think tract 3 is large enough that it could have more than one detached home, but a duplex is a building type and it is not permitted in the R 5.4. So, you know, they could have more than one dwelling unit on tract 3, but it would be a detached home and they'd have to meet all the other standards in the zoning district with that.
Okay, thanks. Brian?
I guess I wanted, is the applicant here in the meeting or on the phone? I don't believe we often hear from the applicant and
I don't believe so. We have a phone
don't think
attendee.
so.
I don't know who that is. If that is the applicant, you can press *9 on your phone to indicate so, and I'll recognize you.
okay, I will just put out there, I guess, you know, it's been raised back on the family exemption appropriateness. There have been questions about the subsequent use. I don't know enough to know if that's a consideration about, you know, whether the family members would be using this, but I'm putting it out there as a question, you know, relative to concerns around attempts to evade the minor subdivision review by use of this. So I don't know if Mr. Nugent or Ryan Sudbury or anyone has any comment on that, but wanted to at least ask the question.
Jim?
I'm unmuted. Muted. State law doesn't have any restrictions with respect to who is to occupy a family subdivision exemption. In fact, we've had instances in the past where they're raising money for their children to go to college. So the expectation is that the lots, once created, will be sold. And at some point in time, all the lots are going to be sold because the land will outlast the human beings, and the human beings aren't going to outlive the land. So at some point in time, there will always be some sale of the land, but there's nothing in state law that says the recipient must live on the land in order for the subdivision exemption to be approved.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks. Heidi? Or Brian, did you have additional questions or are you done? Okay, Heidi.
So I had a question around, I guess, the future zoning of this lot. Because it's a family transfer, is there any amount of time that, I guess, it couldn't be rezoned? Like, could this applicant or the owners come in for a rezone to higher density in the near future?
Mary?
So the rezone would have to follow our public process. So any lot in the city, they can request a rezone. It must comply with the growth policy, including the land use designation, which in this case is open and resource lands. So a rezone is not possible. But even if it was residential medium, R 5.4 is the densest we have. They wouldn't gain anything. I suppose they could do an RT 5.4, and council, you would have the authority to approve that or not.
Thanks, that's super helpful.
Thanks. Tandra?
Thanks. Mr. Nugent brought up a question. So since the people won't outlive the land, when they do pass away and pass on the land to their beneficiaries, will they have to go through a family transfer process as well, or will it just be land given by family subject to estate tax and like such like that.
Jim.
There would be no requirement for an additional review, and it's common for exemptions, subdivision exemptions, to be created for the purpose of generating money for people by selling the lot. Like I said earlier, there is no requirement in state law with respect to the family transfers that someone receiving the family transfer must live or build on the land. So for your question, no, there would be no additional step down in the future. One of the questions you might be interested in is to ask the planners, what could be built there today if there was no subdivision exemption making 3 lots? What could be built there today? And at least one house has to be able to be built there because it's private property, and we can't say it's open space and conservation land and no one can build, because that's a taking. And you better get your checkbook out if you're going to say that.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, we are out of time. There's nothing for a while after this, so if anyone needs to leave, I expect that, but I'll keep us going a few minutes longer if we have additional questions.
Could I touch on something?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think as Randall talked about the hydrant not being adequate up there, and he's right. But the thing is that we can get water out of it. It's just, it doesn't meet current standards. And I would venture to guess his home, if it's an older home, it doesn't meet current standards in lots of areas. The insulation probably wouldn't work today. The electrical, all that kind of stuff. This kind of stuff changes over the years. And I just wanted to make that point that I suppose it's not the taxpayers or the other taxpayers' responsibility in the city to upgrade his fire hydrant as it falls short.
So I had a question along those lines, and I guess that to Mr. Williams' comment, would this fire hydrant be deficient in some way relative to the other nearest fire hydrant? I mean, is the other nearest fire hydrant of better quality or higher flows?
No, it's not.
Okay. Okay, are there any additional questions or comments? All right. I'll just note that it is helpful when the applicant or representative is here. And I know that everyone on staff and everyone on council knows that, but it is helpful to be able to ask and have questions answered. So that might be useful. It might be in their best interest for them to attend future meetings, but this will be back. So there's no decision today. This will be back for a full council decision on next Monday, the 28th. Anything further from anyone? Okay, seeing nothing further, we will be adjourned. Thanks.